My name is Brian Woodland. I moved here 7.5 years ago from Washington, D.C. Became a Buddhist the day after I moved to Albuquerque. I came here to a noontime meditation, which is a breathing meditation, which just calms the mind. And I knew absolutely nothing about meditation. I'd been through some personal turmoil in my life back east. That's why I rebooted my life and came out here. And so I came here looking for something. And it wasn't until I'd been coming here about a year and a half that I had that epiphany that I had become a Buddhist in the meantime. We offer classes here, so I'd started coming to a noontime meditation, which just is a breathing meditation. That you focus on the breath and on primarily just focus on the breath, just calming the mind, stilling the waters. And I started taking a class on Thursday nights that we offer, and it was just on basic Buddhist principles of love and kindness and compassion. We naturally look to our own self-gratification as the structure of our life. So it's something that is unfortunately alien to most of us. It's certainly alien to me. And after a couple of years coming here, I started taking more of an intensive training, a couple of days a week, focusing on particular Buddhist text, and started that training cycle, and then started teaching here about a year ago. And I was a typical Type A personality, but as a Type A personality, I never sat and just rested with my thoughts. Coming in here that Wednesday for the first time, I was fairly stunned how much was going on back and forth in my mind. I spent most of my life being angry. By focusing on these meditations and pulling myself out from my own self-gratification, that my anger is almost non-existent, that I have other tools that I can use that dissipates that anger and allows it not to rise. It's hard to be angry with people when your approach to life is to value people and to love, truly love and cherish every single living being, which is what Buddha taught us. When you have that and you start to bring that down into your heart, into the depths of your heart and your mind, anger doesn't arise naturally. It feels wrong. There's things like anger, jealousy, spite, envy, hatred, aversion. Those are not our natural state. Natural state is peace and calm and tranquility and love and compassion. That lies at our nature. Those other negative emotions are laid on top of those. And so we've got to strip those away to get back at what our core is. And it's things like our career, our material goods, our 401k. That's the way we judge ourselves. That's the way we think that society judges us. And when we go through those periods of turmoil, we find out, and I found out, that those things that I had built my life around for 50 years were meaningless, and they had no spiritual value. And that I didn't know I was on a quest. I just knew that what I had created a life around had no intrinsic value. We spend, as Buddhists, an inordinate amount of time thinking about death and meditating on death. So yes, it's something we've become very comfortable with. We have an opportunity in this life to fulfill the true meaning of our lives. And the true meaning of our lives isn't by the size of our bank account, or by the car that we drive, or the house. Those are nice things to have. But when we look for the meaning of our life, the meaning of our life is built around our spiritual development, by our progress. We as Americans in particular, I think, are uncomfortable with death and the idea of death. But if we can accept that, it's one of our basic meditations that we do, which is, I may die today. And we think we understand that, but we don't. Years ago, I'd worked with people who were terminal. And to a person, at the end, they still would talk about something that was going to happen next month or next year, because they were still in that denial. And until we start to accept and understand our own death and what that means and how critically important it becomes to continue that spiritual development and to realize the full potential of our lives, we'll never make progress. And the other thing that as Buddhists that we try to achieve is at death, we want to die with a peaceful mind because it determines our next rebirth. Because if we die with an angry mind, then we're going to have a lower rebirth. We could be born into a hell realm or an animal realm or hungry ghost realm. So at the very least, we want to maintain that happy mind to achieve another human rebirth so that we can continue our spiritual development. And if we don't understand the nature of our existence and the nature of our death, we will have fear at death. And we should have fear, but it's a wisdom fear. We should fear not being prepared when we die. So the purpose of our spiritual development here as Buddhists is to develop that wisdom fear, to understand that we need to realize the full potential of our lives. I think it's an uncomfortable topic for most people. And I think it makes our grief process even harder because we don't accept it. We don't have discussions about it. Even years ago when I worked with people who were dying, we did not have a whole lot of discussions about their death and what that meant. No, it was something I wasn't comfortable with, and I think as the individuals that I worked with, it wasn't comfortable for them as well. It was easier to pretend, to put that out of their mind. For me personally, I think it was my own discomfort around, because when we face others' mortality, we eventually have to face our own mortality. And most people don't like thinking about our own mortality. My mother 2 years ago, she's very elderly, she's 92 now, and she broke her hip. And so during the recovery period, she was dying. It was very clear that she ended up pulling through, but I was able to talk to her while she was when she was about death from a Buddhist perspective. How does the death process work? What is the next life going to be? It's explaining that it's like a bird leaving the nest and going to the next life, about the indestructible drop, which holds our inner winds and how that is released at the time of death. And I talked to her, and then I did mantras and prayers. And the next day, she told me that she had the most calming experience the night before. She couldn't remember any of the conversation, but she was so calm. And that was, I think, my gift is that to be prepared to have that conversation, to have helped her. My mother's like, I was an atheist before I started coming here. I've been an atheist my entire life. And my mother's an atheist. And if we had conversations in our life about spirituality, it was always dismissive. And I think it was important for her to hear those words at that time when she was slipping away, to understand that from my perspective, that was not true, that there was something else, and that all of her karma, the good karma that she's created in this life, raising 6 children and the struggles that she's been through, that she holds that. Those are imprints that are in her consciousness that will follow her. And that's what we have to offer. When somebody dies, we have an opportunity. As one of the teachers here had said during a teaching years ago, we have an opportunity at that time to commit the most selfless act that we'll ever commit. Because when we help somebody in this life, there's oftentimes a residual of what's in it for us. Even if it's just we want the praise and we want to notice it from other people that we've done something kind or loving or compassionate. When someone is dying or they've died and we do mantras and we do prayers and we do purification on their behalf, it is selfless. Because we can never receive anything in this life in return from that person. So we have this wonderful opportunity at that time for those that we love, for those that we're closest to do something that is an absolute pure act of kindness and compassion. We look for the meaning of our life. When we have those times late at night when we're sitting wondering, what does my life mean? We usually think of it in terms of our own self-cherishing, that what do others think of me? How have I done in my career? What are those material things? What have we built up? What's in the bank account? And that's not the value of our life. The value of our life are the simple acts of love and compassion we commit every single day. That's what builds, that's our legacy. And that's what we take to our next life. That's the wealth that we take. It's inner wealth. From the Buddhist perspective, there are 3 phases to our death. When we are going through the actual active death process, our what we refer to as the inner winds start to pull within, and our connection to this body. We have our consciousness and we have this body that we've identified with. Those connections start to lessen until at the moment of death, there's a separation. So our consciousness separates from our physical body, and then that consciousness leaves the body, and it goes to a state called Bardo, B-A-R-D-O, which is an intermediate state where our consciousness has not yet connected with our next life, our next physical being that will inhabit. So it sort of floats in another world. Then at the end of Bardo, we actually take our rebirth, and we can take rebirth in this realm or in a Buddhist Pure Land. A lot of our grieving process, I think, is tied back to our self-cherishing, our inward focus. Because when we're grieving, oftentimes we're grieving for the loss of what that person did for us, what they meant for us, the love that they gave to us. So the focus is internal. It's back on us, rather than the focus being on that individual. We have prayers that we do here once a month that are prayers for the recently deceased. So we do those once a month, and I did that when I lost my dog several years ago. I went through the process, and during that process, we are focused on helping our loved ones, because that's who we have a strong karmic connection to. Purify their negativities and move to a Buddha Pure Land, so that we are focused externally again on helping them. So the focus is not on our internal grief and what we're going through, because we do feel that. The loss of a loved one needs to be respected. We need to understand that it's not our self-cherishing, our inward focus to grieve for them, to treasure that companionship that we had, that love that was shared. But we should also keep the focus on their journey, because they're leaving this life, they're leaving the body that they inhabited for this portion of their journey, and going on to their next life. And so our focus as Buddhists is on helping them in that next journey and making that connection. I lost my dogs, the 2 prior to that, within the last few years, before I became a Buddhist. The grief was intense. It's like I intensely missed their companionship and the love that they had shown me over the years. With the last one, who I lost when I was a purely devout Buddhist, the process was different for me. The grieving process was different, because in the time up until I lost her, my focus was on her. My concern was on her spiritual journey, and wanting her to have a better life, a better rebirth than she'd experienced this time. Because she'd been born into an animal realm. And so at the very least, we want them to be born as a human,
Yeah.
to have another human rebirth, or better yet, to have the purification and to make the connection so that they move to a pure land,
Yeah.
so that they go to a place that is free from suffering. And when my mother was suffering, and I thought that I was going to lose her, I was going through the same emotions, experiencing the grief of knowing that my mother's death seemed to be imminent at that point. But I also, again, sitting in that hospital room, I had a job to do.
Yeah.
I had a job to do, which was to help her transition and to focus by doing the mantras and doing the prayers,
Yeah.
and praying for her purification of her negative karma, and to explain to her how that next step is going to work. I'm working to not have fears. We all have fears. We all have fears that we're going to physically suffer, or that we're going to develop some lingering long-term illness that's going to take us.
Yeah.
But I focus on developing, as I said before, a wisdom fear.
Yeah.
Because our fear should not be of dying, because we all are going to die. Our fear should be a wisdom fear of dying unprepared. And so all of my spiritual practice, and for all of us here as Buddhists, our focus is on preparing for our death, so that at the time of death, we're not holding anger or clutching at our prior life, that we're able to die with that peaceful mind that we need to die. When I teach here, when I've been to teaching here, a lot of the questions end up revolving around, isn't it depressing to think about death all the time? But it gives you a better appreciation of our good fortune. When good things happen, to really understand and have an appreciation for how special that is and how fleeting those moments are. And also not to dwell on the negative, because we hang on to all the bad things that happen to us and we cling to them. And if we can understand that our death is imminent, whether it's today or 40 years from now, our death is certain. It's just the time and the place is still unknown. But if we can understand and accept that in our day-to-day life, then our moments of happiness become even more joyful. It comes time for our death. We want to be able to understand the nature of what's going to happen, because a lot of our fear of death is a fear of the unknown, not understanding what's going to happen and what comes next. And if we can be prepared for that, then I think it lessens all of those stages that we go through, because we have faith.